All right, here we are. We are at Black Hat USA 2025. This is Sean Martin with ITSPmagazine, and I'm here with Brett from Zscaler. Brett, how are you?
Great. How are you?
Very good. We're second day. It's a busy time. Hopefully, a lot of good conversations here for you and your team.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of research, obviously, a lot of trainings, and a lot of innovation. All of which I think, research and analysis of what's going on, which your team does a lot of, kind of helps drive all those innovations, right? Before we get in, maybe a few words from you about your role at Zscaler and some of the things you do, and if there's anything from your past that you think might help kind of set some context for what we're going to talk about, which is your latest ransomware report. That'd be fantastic. So
yeah, sure. So quick intro for myself. I'm the Senior Director of Threat Intelligence at Zscaler. I've been with the company almost 5 years and run the research team at Zscaler. And been doing lots and lots of cool research. Been doing this for a long time. Now probably coming up on about 20 years.
Wow.
And been doing this type of work and now running a team of researchers, very highly talented researchers. We do a lot of very technical research. We do malware reverse engineering. We use that information to understand threats, to understand the groups, to understand the techniques, and use that information to improve our detections. We also work closely with law enforcement, so instead of just being passive, we also try to contribute to take action against some of these threats. So we've talked about some of these publicly before and kind of changed the calculus a bit and increased the cost of doing business for a lot of these groups. And there's been various levels of success over the years. Some are more successful than others. You can't always have some of these people arrested based on their location.
Right.
But there are other impacts that can sway them away from doing some of the crime that they do.
That's interesting. 20 years, that's a few moments of
Yeah, that's why I lost all my hair.
Deep. That's why mine's gray. I've been doing this for a while myself. So the ransomware report that Zscaler puts together, how long has that been in play?
So we've been doing it for about 5 years now.
Okay.
And each year we try to add some kind of new context and research. This year, one of the new things we added statistics for is data extortion, because we're seeing a shift in kind of the paradigm where file encryption, the ransomware, has been kind of the main show, and now we're seeing a kind of shift away from file encryption and more toward data theft.
Interesting. And what's the driver behind that? Is that just a better business model for the bad actors?
It is a better business model, and some of these groups are starting to realize that it's not always good to be in the news. Sometimes it's better to be low key, just try to stay out of the spotlight, but in the same respect, they still want to make the same amount of money or more. And what they're realizing is the data that a lot of these companies have is actually more valuable to them than just encrypting their files and causing a business disruption.
Has the mindset shifted for these ransomware groups in terms of, I think early on they wanted some publicity, right? So that they had some power to control that engagement with organizations. And now you're saying they don't necessarily want the publicity, but do they still hold a lot of the power then? Or how does that look?
Yeah, so they still will extort companies for payment for not leaking that data. So if they do leak data, obviously they can potentially have that company's information or in the news. But a lot of these companies are choosing to pay ransoms instead of having that data leaked. Last year we talked about the largest ransom payment ever, which was $75 million that we observed. And there was no file encryption deployed in that attack. It was only data theft. They stole 100 terabytes of data from this organization, which had all sorts of medical information, patient records, and the company is a large company. We mentioned it was in the Fortune 50. They decided it was worth paying $75 million than to have that data leaked.
Interesting. Now, there's no guarantee though, right?
There's no guarantee that they're going to delete that data, or if they've copied that data,
right,
or if they sell that data to a third party, or even to a foreign intelligence agency.
Right. Such an interesting world. So 5 years. What was the original scope of the research that came, and or objectives? What were you trying to accomplish here?
Really to track the trends, like what industry verticals are impacted, what regions are impacted, and then we've kind of got more and more as I joined about 5 years ago, contributed more of our own original research and some of our own insights into some of these threats. So I think each year our report gets better and better, and adding more and more information that companies can learn about some of these attacks. We talked about all sorts of different methods that these groups use, and actually, depending on which group it is, the attacks vary, their techniques and kind of preferences, whether to deploy file encryption, whether to steal data, whether to go use an affiliate model, these ransomware as a service models, or whether they just want to, this one organization, this ransomware group that's called Dark Angels, that got that $75 million payment, they have a completely different kind of business model than these other ones. They don't go after hundreds or thousands of companies. They go after one large company at a time, and they can get a lot of money from one large company than trying to hit 100 companies and get maybe $500,000 or a couple $100,000 at once.
So the methods vary. What about the techniques to? Clearly, they have to have some form of say penetration in the organization, or knowledge that they could be.
Yeah.
I guess typically they do find the way in and either encrypt the data or extract it. What about the techniques to do that? Are those all over the place? Or
Yeah,
are you tracking
so that also, so it also varies as well. So one of the things we talked about in the report, we mentioned 5 specific groups that kind of businesses should keep an eye on, and also the techniques that those groups use. And one of them, for example, they actually don't go after individual companies, they go after the software companies that those companies use. So it's more of a supply chain attack. So instead of going after one company and finding a vulnerability there and finding like sending a spam email and someone clicks on something here, what they're doing is they're actually going after the software applications that these companies use. They really like, this group is called CLOP, they really like to go after companies that use file transfer applications, or FTAs. And companies use these all the time. Many companies use these to share files internally, but also externally as well. So for that reason, a lot of them are exposing them to the internet, which means if there's a vulnerability in that application, they can scan, anybody can scan for it on the internet and exploit it. And this group is very good at, they're either finding these vulnerabilities themselves and exploiting them, or they're paying for these vulnerabilities that are discovered. But file transfer applications seems to be their bread and butter, and when they're able to exploit these applications, they steal the data that's stored in those applications, and then they extort
in the storage.
The companies. And originally this group was all about file encryption, but now they realize we don't need to do that business model anymore. We can just extort all these companies for the data that we steal.
And is there any bluffing? Like if they just can, do they have to know that the vulnerability exists, or can they just see that they have the application and maybe
they extort? Yeah, it's real. They do steal the data. They show proof of the data. Generally, like when these groups steal data, they provide a file tree, which is a listing of all the files that they've stolen. They allow the victim to say, hey, choose up to 5 files that you want that are not mission critical, because we don't give you mission critical data, and we'll provide you proof, and they will send them files that they've stolen to prove that they have those files. So they're not bluffing, they do have the data. One thing we do see though is sometimes the volumes of data, they do kind of exaggerate. So sometimes on the leak sites they'll say we stole, I don't know, a terabyte of data, and if you actually look, there's like a lot less than that. So there is some exaggeration or bluffing, but generally when they steal your data, they're providing proof of that data, so it's not bluffing in that sense.
So in terms of who they go after, or I don't know, so you touched on the software within the organizations. Does the type of organization that's using that software have is there a trend there? Like, do they go after fintech? Do they go after healthcare? Do they go after?
Yeah, so in terms of like the companies in general, not these specific attacks, but in general, there's certain industries that are far more targeted than others or impacted than others. So in the report we call out healthcare. Manufacturing is almost always near the top or at the top.
Really?
Yeah, and technology.
For IP, I guess.
Yeah, and then this year it was interesting. Oil and gas actually went up quite significantly. So a lot of these, other than maybe technology, a lot of these are using kind of older technology because it takes them longer. If you have a hospital, you don't want to necessarily change something that you spent a huge amount of money on. You want to maybe kind of get the full lifespan of that because you spent all this money on this technology. So some of these companies are slower to adopt modern security solutions, and as a result, this is kind of the the impact of it.
Right. And in terms of, you mentioned regions as well. Are there certain regions that?
Yep.
That,
the United States by
prey?
far. United States
yeah.
is year over year almost always consistently at the top and by far. So
Okay.
I think the last 2 or maybe even going back several years, the United States has been about 50% of all attacks.
Okay. Is that number or value, money value, or what is it?
Number-wise.
Number-wise,
Yeah.
okay. In terms of the ransom requests, the money part of it, any insights into like a general amount that gets paid? Is there a top number that's interesting to share?
Yeah, so usually like they set the ransom price based on public information. So like they can go on sites where they say the estimated revenue for this company is X. They generally will set the ransom based on that revenue amount. But in some cases, they also have access to the company's financial records. And sometimes they can see their bank accounts and how much cash they have in the bank. And they tell them, we see you have $2 million in the bank. You can pay us $2 million right now. And of course, the companies say, well, that's for this. We can't do that, otherwise we out of business. So and the other thing too is they look at insurance as well. So if they have access to all your files, if you have cyber insurance, they can look at your cyber insurance policy and they can say, hey, we know your insurance policy covers this. We want this.
Right. A lot of times there are clauses in those policies that say if you pay the ransom, though, you don't necessarily get the insurance. I don't know. They probably see that too, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's any interesting trends or anomalies between the different years that stand out to you?
Yeah, so this year in particular, we looked at the volume of data being stolen, and we compared it to last year, and it's significantly increased, almost doubled over the last year. And that's, again, looking at this shift, like, do you really need to encrypt files? You really want to make money. You don't necessarily want to be in the news. You don't have law enforcement, banging on your door or indicting you or, making your life, adding sanctions, like making your life more difficult. Obviously, there are limitations if you you live in certain countries, but there are things that law enforcement can do that can impact their lives as well.
Yeah, interesting. And in terms of the data sets, so obviously if they're that one group going after the FTA and grabbing that data set, it's not the entire organization's data set, it's just that one could be significant and have a significant impact. I'm just wondering, I kind of want to lead to how organizations can spot this. I mean, because if they're taking all the data and they see this exfiltration, that should be a sign, but maybe if it's just the FTA, either they're not monitoring or it's a slow trickle out, or what are some of the signs and why are these organizations not catching them?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the big issues is exposing services to the internet. Because anything you expose to the internet is a potential vector that somebody could either gain access to your network or gain access to your data. So obviously Zscaler provides a solution to prevent that you're not exposing your assets to the internet. But that is a huge vulnerability in and of itself of exposing services that are not necessarily needed to be exposed to the internet. If you can put them behind anything, even a firewall. Yeah. But Zscaler provides a zero trust architecture where you can provide or put all of your assets behind Zscaler's zero trust architecture to prevent someone just scanning for your assets on the internet, and if you have a vulnerability in that service, exploiting that. So there are other issues, of course. So companies are not, and this is kind of in general. Some companies are not properly monitoring their systems, so their network. In this, like this example where this group stole 100 terabytes of data. The group is actually very interesting for a number of reasons, but one of the things they provide to victims who pay is a detailed explanation of how they got into their network and what they stole and how and which accounts they had access to and everything. But at the end of it, they say, oh, and by the way, we were able to steal 300 gigabytes per day of your data. So do the math on 100 terabytes of data at 300 gigabytes per day. So you're talking about weeks of data being stolen with nobody noticing.
Yeah. So that's just they're not watching, or they're not paying attention to the signal?
So there's a number of reasons. Some of these companies, they just don't have the resources, from like a secure or dedicated security team to monitor for these types of things. Or another issue is they get alert fatigue. They're just bombarded with alerts from this and that, and they're like, I don't know where to start, and they don't even look at the alerts because there's so many of them,
right.
And then they miss the important ones.
Yeah. So I think we have a couple minutes left. I want to touch on, all this information is insightful and interesting, also meaningful if one reads it and can translate what that information means to their business and how it could impact and perhaps give them some information to change how they run their program. So how do you find Zscaler customers taking the report and actually making it actionable in their program, and what are some of the things that they've done?
So we have a number of products and services that we offer, and it's a very modular kind of architecture. So you can add different components, and like ideally you have all the components. So you can try to stop these types of attacks at various levels or various parts of the kill chain. So you want to prevent, obviously, initial compromise, you want to prevent the lateral movement, and there's a commonality between a lot of these attacks where they get access to one computer, they use that access to move laterally to another computer and another computer, and generally they are in Windows environments, and the way that Windows environments are generally set up is you have people who have special privileges, domain administrators. If they can gain access to an account that has that domain administrator privilege, they can then have access to literally everything in the company. So there's all sorts of things. You need segmentation, you need to have sandboxing, you need to have DLP, for example, monitoring that data loss. You want to catch that as soon as you can. You don't want it to be 100 terabytes of data later. So there's a number of things that we provide, and there are ways that companies can minimize their exposure. You don't want to have your FTA open to the internet. That's a very bad idea. In fact, one of the things we even reported in the ransomware report this year is there was a company that they were using one FTA, they got hit by CLOP. The next year, there was another vulnerability in a different FTA, so they probably switched over. They said, let's use a different one because this one's not secure. They got hit again by CLOP again, and they said, hey, we paid you $1 million last year, and as part of our agreement, you said you wouldn't hit us again. You just hit us again. And they said, okay, well, what was the Bitcoin wallet address that you sent this payment to? They said, here it is. They said, you're right, we hit you again. We're sorry, we'll delete your data because that was our agreement. We won't hit you again.
Geez.
So you can see how impactful these attacks are.
Right. Interesting. And so maybe a final word from you in terms of how you, beyond the technology, perhaps your team and others within Zscaler can help kind of make some better business decisions around, like obviously switching from one to the next and still exposing it, not a great idea, right? So how do you, I should say, help organizations kind of make some of those decisions that don't leave them exposed?
So I mean, it's kind of somewhat of a mind shift in terms of, you have this legacy architecture with these flat networks, and almost all these networks that are getting hit, they're using VPNs. And so someone connects to the VPN, and it's like they're in the office.
Right.
So if one user is hit, it can have an impact on the entire company and the data of that entire company. They look for file servers and information that can be easily stolen. So the way that we recommend is having zero trust, making sure it's almost a guarantee at some point that one of your users is going to be compromised, and it's limiting that damage and making sure that that one user, it doesn't lead to all of your data or all of your information being encrypted.
Right. And so I still find it amazing that the flat networks.
Yep. Yep.
Maybe that's like the manufacturing, maybe a lot of legacy
Exactly.
healthcare.
And you know, like some of these organizations, you know, it takes time for them.
Yeah.
You know, they're slower to adopt, you know, newer technologies than others, and you know, they're kind of paying the price for it.
Yeah.
Literally.
Literally. Well, it's a scary, fun conversation, and not a good one if you're on the research part of it. Meaning, if you're part of the research, not good for you and your company. But it is good that you do that work.
Yeah,
Brett,
thank you.
And share with folks and in a way that's actionable and meaningful for them to hopefully take some action. And if you're in manufacturing, healthcare, and others in the report, you might want to take a look at it and see how and where you might be exposed that you don't know. See how and where you might be flat and leaving yourself further exposed. And I encourage everybody to connect with Brett and have a chat with him and the team at Zscaler. And Brett, thanks a million for the
Thank you.
conversation. Yeah, good stuff. And thanks everybody for listening. And stay tuned for more from Black Hat USA 25. ITSPmagazine.com/BHUSA25 for this conversation, and connect with the Zscaler team from there, and catch all the other conversations we have. Thanks, everybody.